Like we've got a lot of people. Welcome everybody. This is Risha speaking. I am the A360 marketing advisor based in Ethiopia, and I'm sitting here with both Richard and Metziat. And the purpose of today's webinar is to give you guys a sense of the role that marketing in particular is playing in this project. And the first way that marketing is helping win this project is to really think about who the market is failing, and therefore where we might want to focus our energy. Generally, when PSI does this analysis of use and need, which is something that many countries and programs do, the question is not what should PSI be doing, but rather what needs to be done. Because later in the process, you think about what PSI's role might be. Because PSI Ethiopia is in a very particular situation where we don't provide products and services, and our goal in this program is going to be to mobilize any and all players in the market. Actually, the answer to the question of who is the market failing really is what does PSI need to do. So that does not insinuate we will be doing it ourselves, but that we should be doing something to make sure it happens, working with partners, mostly in the government. So this is use and need. For those of you who haven't seen use and need analyses before, really what this is going to do is going to take readily available information, generally from a DHS, and which gives you percentages. The percent of women who are using a modern contraceptive method. But those percentages can leave some hidden discrepancies when you don't know how large the group is. So we apply those percentages to census numbers to give you projected numbers of people who are in need or who use or etc. So we're also doing this a little weird. Alexis is going to run the slideshow. You're viewing her screen while I talk, so I'm going to have to say next slide. I apologize for that, but it's because we are afraid that we're going to lose an internet connection on this side, and I don't want to ruin the whole presentation if I drop offline. So Alexis, if you can move to the next slide. Thank you. So this is what we call what I call the tree. And what it does here is it's taking PMA data, which is similar to DHS data, but it's the most recent available data for Ethiopia, combining it with census projections from 2007, so projected out to 2015. And we start with the number of girls 15 to 19 years old in projects regions, which is about 4.7 million in Ethiopia. This is just in our project regions. Then we take the percentage who are married and unmarried, and you can see we have about 1 million married and 3.5 million unmarried girls in that age. If we then follow the married tree for a second, you'll see that there's a portion of those married girls who actively say they do not want to get pregnant, and then there's others who want to get pregnant or are currently pregnant or lactating. Of those who that number of doesn't want to get pregnant, it's those who don't want to get pregnant and are sexually active. Some of those with need, as you can see, are using modern contraceptives. That's about 300,000. Some are using traditional methods, about 1,000, and some are not using contraception at all, about 250,000. If we follow the unmarried part, the added thing here is of those who are unmarried, how many are sexually active? And you can see that in Ethiopia, that's a very small percentage. So of the 3.5 million unmarried girls in the project region, less than 100,000 say they are sexually active. And then out of that, about half don't want to get pregnant, and out of that, about half are using a modern method. So when you total up the two groups who don't want to get pregnant, you end up with 620,000 girls who need. And Alexis, if you can hit down one time. And if you add up the two green slots of using modern methods, that adds up to 348,000 approximately girls who use. Just so you know, that's about 56%. So of the girls who need, about 56% are using. I want to make a small point about how this compares to the figure we're used to seeing around modern contraceptive prevalence rate, CPR. So modern contraceptive prevalence rate of 15 to 19-year-old sexually active girls is 30.2%, which is obviously different than the number I just said of 56%. And the reason is that this use over need is of only those girls who say they don't want to get pregnant. So it's 348,000 divided by that 600 plus thousand in the orange circle. CPR is those same number of users divided by all sexually active girls of that age. And so you end up with a CPR of 30%, but we're saying 56% of those who state a need are actually using. I want to just open it up to questions there because this is a lot of logic and definitions. So any questions before I move on?
Mine is not, well, it's not necessarily tied to the numbers. I'd love to know what traditional methods you're referring to.
So we use the definitions that DHS and others use. So in this case, it's usually periodic abstinence. I think in Ethiopia, the two that come up the strongest are periodic abstinence and withdrawal.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna keep going, but please, there's a little thing where you can raise your hand on the bottom or type in a message or just turn on your microphone and ask questions. Please feel free to interrupt. So you can see there's a little blue bubble there that says there's a need gap of 271,000 girls. So this is the additional users, the potential additional users that we could add during this program. Alexis, can you hit next? I just want to point out that the project goal for Ethiopia is 132 new users and half new users. And so if we achieve that, keeping the 348,000 that already use, keeping them using and adding another 132,000, that means that our targets are about half of the existing need gap, which is pretty ambitious. But I just want everyone to understand that.
Risha?
Yes.
This is Ali speaking. So a quick question. What do you see as the limitation of this number? Because this is all self-reported.
Right.
So do you have any kind of understanding of to what extent this actually reflects the reality and how?
Well, I think that's part of what we will try to uncover in the next month when we start our formative insight gathering. But yes, so there are a few things, and I'll highlight one of them in a future slide. But one would be the percent of girls who say they are sexually active, and how accurate is that, and is that understood the same way by the respondents that we would understand it? And at this point, I can't answer that. Every survey in in Ethiopia that we see, every bit of research confirms that it's small, but is it this small? I can't say that. And so part of what we'll be doing is trying to understand that a bit more. I guess the other part where people might be telling the truth or not is whether or not they want to get pregnant. And some of this is an interpretation of how the question is asked. And some of this we want to understand a little more, because as you see, we have about, and I should point out that because the number of sexually active unmarried is so small, I'd be very careful about being too sure about any of these numbers, because if one or two people had said differently, the sample size is so small of this group that these percentages would change. So I highlight that in the next slide, but I just want to highlight that here too. But right now, it looks like about half of the sexually active unmarried girls are not trying to avoid pregnancy. They're saying that they either want to get pregnant or they're not actively trying to prevent, they don't, because the question is almost in a double negative. The question is asked, do you not want a kid? Actually, maybe somebody who knows DHS better, but it's, do you not want a kid in the next 2 years? I think is about how it's, so if they're sort of neutral on it, they get put into that wants to get pregnant bit. And that is something we can explore more, and we would like to explore more.
And I see that, Deidre, do you have a question? I see your hand up.
That might be a remnant from where I think Dee just sent a chat.
Okay.
Ready?
All right. Thank you.
So if no other questions, we can go on to the next slide. So this puts that exact same data into two circles. So on the left, you see your married adolescent girls. Again, you see that 571,000 of those who are married are saying that they want to avoid a pregnancy. And of those, 323 are currently using a modern method. So that's 57% use. What we see on the other side is a much smaller number, and the ratio of the sizes of these circles should be accurate. But I do put dotted lines around the unmarried sexually active in Ethiopia because the sample size was so small that it's really hard to be, if 2 more people said they were using, it could go up to 80% use. So it's a very tentative number here. But at this point, it looks like about the same 53% of those who need use. You can go on, Alexis. Well, actually, sorry. Yeah, we can stay here. But I want what we would conclude from this slide is that the market is failing married girls in Ethiopia. There is a much greater need gap of our married adolescent girls versus our unmarried. So the difference between those who use and need for married is 248,000. And the difference between those who use and need unmarried is tentatively 23,000. So if we're looking to get large numbers of new users, our focus would need to be on married adolescents. And that, again, is who the market is failing in Ethiopia. Any questions on that before I go on? Because it's a rather important conclusion.
Yes, I see that Deidre actually does have a question. She wants to find out if we know if need is ever used or consistent use of any other breakdown.
Need is ever used. No, so need is I am sexually active and I don't want to have a baby. With the caveat that I'm also fertile and not pregnant or lactating. So, so need is not defined by use at all. It's just pure, I want to avoid a child, but I could get pregnant. The use is what are you using now? Yeah, and it has to be considered a modern method to be put in that green circle. So it's not consistent necessarily. Okay, anyone else? Okay, Alexis, can you go to the next one? So this is where this project, I think, differs from some of our larger age range family planning projects, which is that there's a bit of when you look at the where pregnancy is high risk, there's the 4 twos, right? There's the too early, too late, too many, too close. And when we're talking about adolescents under the age of 18, it's considered too early. So that there's a clinical or medical risk associated with pregnancy under the age of 18. I know I'm not saying anything you guys don't know, I just want to repeat that. So in addition to the girls who are saying they don't want to have children, there is possibly a clinical need for girls who are sexually active but do want to have children before the age of 18. And again, this is something that we need to really think about and debate about. But what I've done here is taken the ratio of those girls who are under the age of 18, but who said that they actually want to get pregnant. This is not a perfect number. There's some guesses in this math around who was already pregnant or who might get pregnant, but this is the approximate number of married girls who are in the 15 to 17-year-old age bracket and said that they want to get pregnant. And there's an additional 303,000 of those that are married. And so what that means is that if we do consider that need, it's a different, I'm calling it clinical need here versus stated need, that you would end up with a need of over 800,000, almost 900,000 married adolescent girls, of which only 323 use. This is sort of the last we're going to talk about that, but I want to make the point that there might be some clinical work that we would want to address for sexually active girls under the age of 18, even if they currently say they want to get pregnant. And I'm expecting questions about this one. Any questions?
I see that Sam has a question.
Yeah, Risha, would you mind just quickly explaining again, just so that I'm sure I understand how we know if girls have a clinical need but haven't actually stated it? Where is that coming from again?
So it's just taking the percentage of the girls that are under the age of 18, because once they're 18, they are no longer considered to have a medical risk or high medical risk. So taking the 15 to 17-year-olds out of the married girls who do say that they want to get pregnant.
Okay.
For the unmarried, it's taking the sexually active unmarried who are under the age of 18, but also say that they want to get pregnant.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else?
It looks like there's a question from Deejis in the chat. Have folks see that? She says, just want to find out if we know if need is ever used or consistent use or any other breakdown.
Yeah, we answered that previously.
Oh, sorry.
No worries. So I want to state again that this is not usually considered in women of reproductive age, but I'm pulling it out because of the age of these girls. Okay, Alexis, you can go to the next one.
Actually, Rachel, this is Rebecca. Sorry, I can't quite figure out how to raise my hand, but have you shared these numbers with the Ethiopian government? Because I'm interested in places that have a lot of early marriage, and early marriage is usually associated with then getting pregnant really quickly thereafter. Like, how does this assumption about a clinical need before the age of 18, how does this go down potentially when sharing it with partners?
I'm going to hand the computer over to Metziat.
Hi everyone, this is Metziat. Yes, we shared the presentation to the senior government person in Ethiopia, but we didn't get their reaction yet. But in terms of the need for the child marriage versus health risk associated with that, it's illegal in the country, and the government is really working hard to make sure that A, the marriage itself is not happening, and B, if once happened, it should be kind of harming the life of the girls, like health-wise, and sending them back to school. So there are here and there type of initiatives done by different partner organizations. If that answers your question, Rebecca.
Thanks, Matzet. I think if I can just repeat back it sounds like if we're saying that girls sexually active girls under the age of 18 have a clinical need for contraception, that should align with the government of Ethiopia's desire to discourage early marriage.
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
I think one of the things that that we talked about when I've presented this earlier to the team is also that this might be a really hard group to find, because as the government cracks down on child marriage, we might have a hard time finding girls who admit their age and that they're married. So this may be a case where we end up talking to girls who say they're 18 and who may not yet be. But it's still, right now it's coming up in surveys as a need area. Alexis, do you want to move on? So I'm ignoring the clinical need, and we're just back to stated need. Girls who say that they do not want to get pregnant right away. And this shows the breakup of what they say they're using according to PMA in 2014. And there's only 3 methods on the chart, so it's not a very diverse mix. It's heavily injections at 76%, followed by implants at 18% and pills at 6%. The way the question is asked, if they're using more than one method, the most effective method is counted. So these girls might also be using condoms, for instance. But in this survey, no married girls who are just using condoms showed up, and no longer term methods such as, longer term implants, but no IUDs, for instance. And we can't say anything about the unmarried. There's just not enough of a sample size. Okay. One of the things we like to do is to be able to look at use versus need over urban versus rural. Unfortunately, the data for 15 to 19-year-olds is not broken out in that way. So what I've done here is taken the 2014 mini DHS. So I'm just highlighting that there's a different data source here, same year. And the percentage and therefore numbers of those who have already had children in urban versus rural. So the fact that the rural bar is higher just means that most 15 to 19-year-old girls in Ethiopia are rural. That's all that means. But we do see that a higher percentage and a much higher number of girls in that age bracket are already pregnant. So this means they're pregnant, have had the child, or have had more than one child at that point. So this would look like the market is failing rural girls more than urban girls, and that would be somewhere we would want to look and focus on. Okay, next slide. I want to just compare that. Oh, does someone have one?
Sorry, it's Alice. It'd be helpful on the previous slide to actually look at the fertility rate and not just the total number. I don't know if, no. You don't have, because it's written Ethiopian adolescent 15 to 19 fertility rates. And it would be interesting to understand if that's possible between urban and rural, whether you see a difference in terms of rates and not just absolute number.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you, this is the percentages applied to numbers. So yes, there's a higher percentage in rural. I don't think I have it in front of me. I'd have to open it up, but yes, it's a higher percentage.
Okay, thanks.
So just a comparison with our, because we have a different data source here with the gate segmentation data. TGIST on the left is for the most part married, and HEWATs are for the most part unmarried. And what we see is some very similar results. In this case, they did not ask the girls if they wanted to become pregnant. So this has no stated need. This is just they are sexually active and are not using. And we see a slightly higher percent of use coming out of the Gates data versus the PMA data. And we see 0 use amongst HEWATs. So yeah, 0. And you can click once more, Alexis. And then when we look at the method they're using, it's actually a little more diverse. So the TGIST, you start to see condoms and IUDs both becoming relevant. Part of this might be because of how the questions were asked in slightly different ways. And then part of this might also be because some of the TGISTs are in fact unmarried. And so we might be seeing unmarried method mix coming in. So that's the sort of disaggregation I can do for specifically 15 to 19-year-olds. We can compare it to women of reproductive age overall to see national trends. And the first one we can do is rural versus urban, where we see that, unsurprisingly, there are more women who need in the rural area. There are just more women in the rural area. But they also have a lower use. So we have 53% of the rural women who need using, and 74% of the urban women who need using. And the next slide.
Sorry, Risha, I just see a question from Brett. So is this an okay place to stop? He says, the previous two slides, I think titling them fertility rates is confusing because that has a specific definition already, and the data displayed aren't rates. Something like total numbers of adolescents who could be less confusing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thanks, Brett.
Great.
So this now shows you the method mix, rural versus urban. There are some differences, mainly that urban is where the IUDs are, and sterilization, where we have far smaller numbers of those, and it's heavily injectable in the rural. You know, the lack of method mix that we're generally seeing here is usually considered a bit of a failure in terms of how heavily dependent on injectables this data is showing that both the adolescents and all women of reproductive age are. Okay. And then we go by need quintile. So one of the things that we see here is that the circles get slightly bigger as they go up. This is a reflection because a quintile is by definition the same number of people. So this is a reflection really of the percents who say they are not trying to get pregnant. And in the lowest quintile, we have more women who say they are trying to get pregnant. We also have lower percent of use versus need in our lowest quintile. So I would say from this slide, the market is failing our lowest quintile women, our poorest women. And you can click to the next one. And for method mix, again, we see a more diverse method mix in our highest quintile, where condoms and IUDs come into play. The others are heavily injectable with about a quarter or less of implants. So, like, again, we would probably say that's a market failure in the lower quintiles. Okay. Then I've looked at the regions for the project. So Diradawa and Harari are not listed out as separate regions for these analyses because the data is not there. So we have 5 regions left. You can see that the biggest regions in terms of numbers are Oromia and Amara, followed by SNNP, which is our southern nations. And again, this is women of reproductive age, not adolescents specifically. And we see really different use over need percentages, where Oromia, the market is really failing Oromia with 45% use. And that's let me quickly go to that. That's a need gap. Oh, maybe I didn't list it. Oh, it's on the next slide, so I'll tell you in the next slide. Actually, can you go back? Sorry, Alexis. I just want to point out that the map underlying this is actually a map of modern CPR for adolescent girls. And this was done by another NGO who put it online. And I don't have the data, the background data. They got access to data I don't have out of the DHS. But it's a nice little reflection here that we can see that ADIS is both doing pretty well in terms of filling its need for married women and adolescents, whereas our poorest regions for this project are really SNNP and Oromia. And we see Oromia failing married women of reproductive age. SNNP seems to be specifically failing adolescents at a greater rate than it's failing its older women. So conclusions from this slide would be the market is failing Oromia, and we might want to put some concentrated effort there versus the other project regions. Okay. Okay, then we can go to the next slide, which spells out that need gap. So we see about 1.5 million women who need but are not using in Oromia, 600,000 in Amara and in SMP, and less than in Addis and Tigray. I put the adolescent girl population on the side there just to sort of think about, okay, but is for some reason one of these areas not as full of adolescent girls as another? And the trend is pretty similar. So if we wanted to focus on just pure numbers of adolescent girls, it'd be Oromia, Amara, and SNNP. So that matches the need gaps, which is nice. So those would probably be the areas that we're likely to find the most women and solve problems for most women. Sam is asking about Gambella. Gambella has, I don't know, at 2014, was it the same situation, Metsea, in terms of unrest and insecurity? Yeah, so, yeah, I don't know why Gambella is doing, you've talked about this in the past, maybe just, why is Gambella having such high MCPR for adolescents? Do you know why they're a success for adolescents? Is there specific work? No, we don't know. Okay. And the next slide is around method mix. And again, we see some really interesting differences region to region. Just a reminder, this is all married women of reproductive age, so not just adolescents. Addis has the highest method mix, where you really see relatively significant use of IUDs and condoms, whereas the rest of the regions are heavily injectables, a little bit implants, and a tiny bit pills, and not much else. Okay. 2 quick slides. Reasons for non-use. So this is women, and specifically 15 to 19 in the orange, who are not using and don't intend to use. They are asked why they don't want to. And the 2 highest answers for both all ages and adolescents specifically is menopause or subfecund, meaning I am not fertile, and that it's opposed by self, partner, or other, the use of modern contraceptives. It's interesting that there's 15 to 19-year-olds out there who think they're infertile. That is a bit of a question mark, but it's 2%, and so I wouldn't get too carried away, but it's something that we sort of have our eye on why are people saying they're infertile at that age, and what's letting them know that. And the next slide.
Would that be, just in response to that, 15-year-olds or 15 to 19, it's possible they haven't started menstruating yet and might therefore think they're infertile?
That's possible, or that they have infrequent menstruation and think that that's a sign of infertility. Exactly,
yeah. It's definitely a delayed puberty in most of Ethiopia.
Okay, that's useful. The slide here shows you discontinuation rates. I think that this is something the project as a whole is really interested in, but the data is pretty weak. If you'll notice, this is 2005 data. It's pretty old. And that's because they stopped asking these questions in later DHSs. But you do see here that the pill is the highest discontinued method in the last 12 months. Alexis, there's little arrows if you push down. Or next slide. And the reason for discontinuation rate of the pill is side effects or health concerns. And the reason, the biggest reason for discontinuation of traditional is that they became pregnant. Traditional methods. 5 years, I'm just gonna skip this. I don't think it tells us much different. A lot of people become pregnant when they use non-modern methods. Looking at some trends over time can give us a little bit of insight into how the market is changing. So this looks at 15 to 19-year-old married girls and their use versus need. One thing to state is that there are a growing number of married girls who need in this age range. Because I know the numbers that underlie this, it is not accurate to say that child marriage or adolescent marriage is going up. It's rather that more of those girls are stating that they don't want to become pregnant. So that's why the orange circle is increasing over time, and that use is in this group is increasing. So we see that in the CPR rates along the bottom, but that's also reflected in the use over need numbers from 18% in 2005 to 57% in 2014.
Risha, I'm seeing a couple questions. Would it be better to wait until the end, or do you want to address them now?
Yeah, I can read some of these. So Dee just asks, why is injectables as a key method considered a market failure? It's not that it's as a key method considered a market failure, but when you have a reliance on 80% on any method, that seems skewed. Usually you're seeing more diverse method mix. We don't have goals for particular percentages, but it's just an observation. From my personal opinion, we also know that injectables have a longer delay in return to fertility than other methods, and that's of such concern to adolescents that they're able to get pregnant as soon as they want to, that it also doesn't seem like a great method to be the number one and such heavy reliance on that method for this age group. Brett has asked if the reasons for not using make sense. Why are the percentages so low? And yes, most did not answer that question. That's why you see such low percentages for adolescents. Any other questions while we're stopped? Okay, so we can go to the next slide, Alexis. And this is the method mix over time. The big game changer in Ethiopia over the last several years has been implants, and you can see that pretty clearly here. That implants are now at 18, or in 2014, we're at 18%, and there were nothing in 2005, and that's been a very concerted and purposeful push by the government. This is the same data, just given in percentages, not in numbers. And one thing to note is that unmet needs stayed fairly stable amongst married adolescents up until 2014, where you start to see it drop, which is great. And the increase in modern CPR. TCPR, I know, is not an actual term, but I'm using it to say traditional CPR, contraceptive pregnancy rate. And this is unmarried sexually active women. Again, I have that circle around the 2014 or the dotted line to just say that we shouldn't put too much into these numbers because the sample size is small. But it does appear that we saw a big drop in unmet need between 2000 and 2001, and that has stayed fairly stable up to 2014. It appears from these numbers that there's been a drop in modern contraceptive prevalence rate over the last between 2011 and 2014, but again, I hesitate to put too much into this because of the sample size. But if we believe this, we have a growing market failure for unmarried sexually active adolescents. We will have 2000. Yes.
Sorry, can I just, this is Rebecca, if I can just jump in for a clarifying question. The data source in 2014 is PMA.
Yes.
And then is the data source in 2011 is DHS?
Yeah, all the others are DHS.
Okay, because that might have something to do with it, with the drop in the estimates.
Yeah, and unfortunately, because this is such a small group of unmarried sexually active adolescents, DHS doesn't even present it because it's such a small number. So that's why we went to PMA. We have a DHS that we expect to come out in the next sort of 6 months in Ethiopia, and hopefully that will answer some of these questions. We'll update this as soon as we get it. Brett is saying that for Uganda, the trends between DHS and PMA are quite consistent. And up until 2014, that's been true in Ethiopia as well. And there was a big inconsistency, sorry, I'm reading what Brett's saying. There was a big inconsistency between DHS and PMA in Ethiopia in specific, possibly age ranges. He hasn't finished typing yet. PMA has published some papers trying to explain the differences in Ethiopia in particular. So that, yes, I think Brett is saying that that could be the case here. Okay, Alexis, do you want to go to the next slide? This looks at unmet need, married women over time by age. And so we see that Ethiopia has had great gains in family planning over the last 10 years for all age ranges. So we see drops, and we see drops in particular, but in the last survey for adolescents, but as has just been discussed, that could be the source, the difference between PMA and DHS. Okay. So that was trends for adolescents. This is trends where age can't really be broken out just for adolescents. So this graph shows you the median age at first marriage and the median age at first sexual intercourse. And what we see here, and we don't ask that of adolescents, we ask that starting at age 25. So what we see here is that essentially girls were getting married and having sex at the exact same time in the year 2000, pretty much the same story in 2005. They were delaying sexual intercourse by about a month in 2011, and now it's by a few months. So overall, it's still the case that girls are getting married and then very shortly thereafter having their first sexual intercourse, but that space is growing. And then we have a comparison of modern contraceptive prevalence rate and the total fertility rate. This is a weird one, and this is the only country of the three that this is happening in, and I think that this conversation around PMA's differences might explain it. But we see a modern contraceptive prevalence rate of all women of reproductive age going up very sharply up until 2011 and then dropping slightly in 2014. However, we see a TFR continuing to drop throughout that period. We would expect that those two lines intersect or are inversely related, but I'm going to speculate that this is about the PMA comparability to DHS in Ethiopia. In general, the trends are good. Manya is asking that the space between marriage and first sex is, or I should just read what Manya says, coitus is interesting. Courtney, might there be a cultural explanation for this in your mind?
I'll have to do a little more research on it to truly answer that question well.
Okay. I think that talking to the team here, this is what I had expected to see. Most of the stories and data coming out of Ethiopia is that women get married young to older men, not old men, but slightly older men. And that age of first sex for both of those groups corresponds with age of first marriage in general. So we just don't hear a lot or see data that reflects premarital sex in the country. Again, we can ask more about that. We can see if we believe that 100%, but that's pretty much the story coming out of Ethiopia. Okay, Alexis? And these are just a few that for those of you who have seen this before, these are a few new ones sparked by some questions that Tanzania asked about their use and need. So one is to look at the use and need by source. So the use and need circles on the left show all women of reproductive age, whether they're married or unmarried, who state a need and then who state a use. So we have 56% use nationally and where they're sourcing their contraceptives. So the Health Extension Worker, HEW's Health Extension Worker, has been the really big push in Ethiopia, and these are community health workers generally. They may be at a health post or may just be in their communities. And the government has invested a lot in them over the last 5, 7, 10 years. So since 2003, so 13 years, and has given them task shifting so that they're able to do implants. So this is greatly influence the increasing CPR over those last 13 years. And so we've pulled this out specifically. So and it's a public sector initiative. So really the blues can be combined to be considered public sector. So most family planning methods are coming from the public sector here, about 13% private sector. And we can see that HEW is a large source. And when we look at per method, we see that the private sector plays the greatest role, sort of oddly, in pills and IUDs. They did not look at condoms specifically in this analysis. And that the health extension workers play their greatest role in pills and injectables. So there is a question here. This is DHS 2010. There is a question here about why we aren't seeing more implants from health extension workers, because that's what we believe is happening. So that might just be a data timing that is 2010. Next slide. This is by region. So this is FP Watch data. That last was still DHS data. This is now going to FP Watch. And so we have 4 of our regions. We have specific information. So this is, if you're looking for an outlet that provides family planning, and it must provide something more than just condoms, so a method other than condoms, this is where you're going to find those outlets. And so in Addis, we see a heavy presence of pharmacies and drug shops, and no health extension workers. In Amara, Oromia, and SNMP, the story is very different than in Addis, but fairly similar to each other, where the health extension workers are playing a really significant role, are one of the major, how do I say this correctly? If you were looking for contraceptives, they are at least half of what's available in those areas. I hope I'm saying that right. Okay, and then I've done a little analysis. I don't want to spend too much time because I'm seeing what time it is. And I can, just give everyone this presentation. So let's just stay with Addis and not go to the regions, but the other regions follow this. And it just looks at, of the health facilities who provide something more than condoms, how many of them are currently stocking or providing service for the following products. And I've color-coded them so that the darker green it is, the better, and the darker sort of orangey brown it is, the worse. And what we see here is that the public health facilities have a really good supply of everything, but predominantly the shorter-term methods. Private health facilities in Addis have a really unreliable stock or supply of anything. And pharmacies and drug shops are great for condoms and OCs, a little less great for emergency contraceptive, and just not the place to go for your implants and IUDs. Just without going forward, Alexis, we're going to stop here. Not to reveal the story, but it looks very different in the other regions, just FYI. So we're going to stop there. What this is meant to do is to give us some real insights, looking at very commonly available data, into where the market is failing, who the market is failing, and therefore where should we be thinking about really focusing our energy. In the conversations that I've had with the team here, and we've gone through this several times now, what really jumps out at us is that the focus in Ethiopia is going to be very heavily on married girls, probably very heavy in Oromia and in the rural areas, which is most of the country, but still good to keep in mind. And that we want to have greater insights into some of the issues around method mix and supply and availability. So, it would appear that supply is affecting use in terms of it seems to be a driver of use versus the demand being the driver, but where is that space in there? Do people want methods that they can't access? Would they want them if they were available? So I turn it over to everyone else. Question? So Deepest is asking, is supply and method mix a key barrier for non-use? We don't believe so. So the only data we have into that right now is the gait segmentation. And what we see for Tigist, who is predominantly our married adolescent, is that the primary barrier to use is agency, which is that she's not making her own decisions about important life areas. The primary barrier to use for our HEWATs, who are primarily the unmarried adolescents, is around environment, which the key question in there around family planning is, do you find it easy to use family planning? And so we do have a note to ourselves that we want to unpack what easy to use means. Most of the questions are around easy to access.
Risha?
Yes.
It's Sally speaking. I know it's in your landscape, but I don't have it on the top of my head, but what's the legal age of marriage in Ethiopia? You said that the government was fighting to implement the policy.
18. I'm just repeating what Metziat's saying here. It's 18, except in 2 regions where it's lower.
So we are working with a target group, which is the married adolescent girls, which is the group that the government wants to see disappeared, which is going to be, but I'm just reflecting on the fact that you said at some point that it might be hard to find these girls just because they might not be saying that they are married and under 18.
Yeah, so what we're hoping they say, what we suspect they're going to say is that they're 18.
Yeah.
Which is they're still in our target group. They're still people that we want to address, but we may not know that we're really reaching 16-year-olds.
Okay, so it's an interesting challenge that our main target group in Ethiopia is a group that doesn't want to identify, basically. That's going to be easy. Okay, interesting.
No problem.
When was the policy, the legal age of marriage enforced?
2005.
Okay.
So, one proxy here would be that it's been illegal since 2005. These surveys are all done in 2014, and people are still saying this is the situation. So we may not have stigma around it that we would anticipate.
Yeah, okay.
We do know that in the last 2 years, the enforcement has gotten stronger. So we may run into more problems as we go.
Okay. Interesting. Thanks.
This is Manya. I've got a question for Metzhat, which is, after seeing this data and this analysis, has this data and analysis changed or surprised you in some way? And how is this data for you changing the way that you're thinking about programming in Adolescence 360?
My answer to this would be both yes and no. And the reason why, maybe I should start from the no justification. Like, we know that the market is failing the rural, the married one, and child marriage is high in the country. But if we take like the child marriage prevalence, it's more in other regions, not in Oromia. Like Amhara and Tigray are known for their high rate of child marriage, but Oromia used to be kind of a little bit safe for adolescents. But I realized that Oromia is also having that problem, and the need is high in that region. And maybe how it changes the way I think is like wherever you go, the way the in school, those who are in university, young people, how they express their sexual feelings, how they exercise their behavior. Their sexual behavior is usually upon discussion, be it at policy or at program level. But for those who are living in rural area and facing lots of problems, no one is really mentioning them as a kind of target, which completely will change the way I flag the issue to outsiders, including the government. Because if you go to the government, they will ask you to work in urban setting, in universities, in Tibet, in colleges, in high schools. But from this analysis, I don't think that's the case. I mean, we still don't clearly understand like what the situation looks like for the unmarried girls and sexually active. Who are they? When they get sexually active, in what situation, where do they get service? Because the sample size is small, as Risha said. It's something that you shouldn't ignore as a program person, but still, we do have a strong data that justifies our presence in rural areas among the married adolescent girls.
Thank you.
Okay, just a comment from Courtney that she thinks many girls in rural areas are not going to know their chronological ages, so legal age of marriage may not matter, in quotes. What will be important is if their communities believe they have reached an appropriate social status for marriage. Thank you for that. And Metziat's nodding her head. It seems to resonate.
Well, along those lines, it might be worthwhile to see if we can get a quick feel on the cultural age categories for a region. I mean, I have that data for the Sidama, but not necessarily, it shouldn't be hard. Ethiopia has had a lot of anthropologists, but that could give us a framework because I do think the actual age ranges might be a little lower, a little higher out in rural areas in terms of who would need to be addressed or targeted for this project.
Okay. If that's something you can help us with, that'd be great, because I'm not.
Absolutely, yeah.
Other questions?
Risha, I have a 1 minute question. Just when you said that the PMA sample was very small for unmarried, how many girls are we talking about in the sample? You remember?
Yeah, let me look. I can dig it up.
I'm asking for two reasons. One is because, should we just not consider this number full stop? And the second is because we've been looking at working to see if we could strengthen the PMA 2020 platform for 15 to 19. So just wanted to see if that was a real gap in countries.
In general, I would say let's not consider it, but I think that the overall percentages are fair. I mean, I did look at previous years, and they're not completely different. So I might consider that their use and their need is much smaller than the married girls because they are just a smaller group, full stop. What we might ignore completely is the reporting of use or unmet need, because it might be difficult. I'm not able to get that really easily. I can definitely look into the analysis and get you what that number was. I don't know, Brett, do you remember off the top of your head? I know you looked at these numbers too. Brett's not able to unmute, so.
Don't worry, we can follow up after.
Okay, it's small. The question was, do you remember how many girls the sample size is in EMA for unmarried sexually active? I want to say it was like 49.
Okay.
Risha, this is Rebecca, if I can jump in with a question. So this analysis has, for Ethiopia, has done a lot to help the team to focus on geographically and population-wise where, and probably also around method mix, like where and how to focus. So can you give us a preview of how this analysis for Tanzania and Nigeria is also helping to focus thinking there?
Sure. So I have presented, I've given the analysis to both Tanzania and Nigeria. I have had a chance to talk to the Tanzanian team about theirs, and I have not had a chance to talk to the Nigerian team about theirs. For Tanzania, we have very similar use need gaps between unmarried and married. So it's a very different situation. So it's really, right now they're working with unmarried, but it looks like the larger need gap, although unmarried are significant there is within the married. So that is expanding their work into the married. We're talking now about how that will happen. There's also some really interesting data there about the regions and where the greatest use need gaps are for the regions. And it's looking like some of the lake regions like Mwanza are coming out with that have real market failures in those areas and very different method mixes between the regions. So that's focusing sort of where we move to next, because right now they're very heavily in Dar es Salaam.
Thanks for that.
As expected, nothing in Nigeria is straightforward. There's many, many groups and many, many subgroups, and it looks very different place to place. So I hesitate to say what it has said until we really get a chance to talk through it.
Risha, this is Manya. This is a comment. The first time I saw this analysis when we were together in Addis, I was really blown away. And particularly because sitting in meeting after meeting after meeting and technical working group after technical working group thinking about adolescence, I was just struck by how easy it is to fall back on stereotypical ideas of who adolescents really are, which adolescents really have a need. And I just find this entire analysis of who the market is failing to be so practical and so useful in helping us focus our design on the populations where we'll have a chance to have impact at scale in a universe where very often adults sit in conference rooms and want to target people who they just feel are they're the most worried about. And I just think this is the kind of analysis that cuts across those kinds of biases and helps people see where the real need is, and particularly where the opportunity for scale is. So I just think it's phenomenal and such an incredibly cool and powerful tool, and one that I'm excited to share with the public health world as a whole. It's fantastic.
Well, I would say thank you, but I didn't create it. So I will accept a thank you on behalf of the team back in DC and around the world that created this.
Phenomenal. It's really good.
Any last questions?
If, Misha, I don't know to what extent it would be possible to see the presentation you did for Nigeria and for Tanzania, that would be great. And just want to echo Manya's point, like this is really fantastic analysis. And I was thinking that this recording would be of great interest for the rest of the consortium. So that might be something you want to share with them. But that's fascinating actually.
Yeah, so we wanted to do this webinar because I think it's actually it's not the easiest thing to read if you're seeing it for the first time.
Exactly.
So we wanted to do this webinar, and then I will definitely send around Tanzania and this one to everybody. I might pause on Nigeria's just because the first time I talk it through with the team, they often catch things that are errors. And so I would like to talk it through with them once before sharing it with everybody.
Great.
Okay, well, because of the time, I think we're really close, maybe a few minutes over. I want to thank everybody. I really appreciate the odd hours that people are staying or calling in from. And I will share both Ethiopia's and Tanzania's immediately with you guys on Slack and through emails. And hopefully this recording will be available very shortly so that people who couldn't make this can join in as well. If you have continuing questions, please feel free to reach out to any of us, myself or Metziad or Rebecca, for more information.
Thanks.
Risha.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Risha.
Thanks, Risha. Great job.